Good evening and welcome to the Paxmundi Show. The Paxmundi Show on Darkcity Radio every Thursday evening, 7 p.m. GMT, the Paxmundi Show, with tales of war, peace and resistance news, film, book and music reviews, interviews. Call in live and chat if you want to. Tales from the Dark Side, jam-packed with information of what is currently happening around the globe, which you will not hear in the mainstream media. News from the front lines on the expanding global war of terror. And that will be followed by NATO's expansion, global hegemony. First, in the US, the big story this week is the whistleblowing by NSA operative, that is Edward Snowden, who has broken classified information, news about the NSA data mining of metadata of holders of Verizon accounts. So this is the breaking news. This is the first time that a global surveillance of telecommunication records within the US internally has actually been exposed. And you can be sure that if this is happening with Verizon, one of the big companies in the US, it will be happening with the others, AT&T, etc. Snowden, who was employed by Booth and Hamilton as subcontractor for the National Security Agency, he worked in Hawaii, and there he was intelligence analyst, looking at all of this data, which is being taken of all telecommunications. So this he found to be unacceptable, the scale of this operation, the fact that the public were not aware that their accounts, were being taken, and the metadata used by the US government. So Snowden is currently in Hong Kong, where he's hoping to avoid extradition to the US. The US government has already started charging him. His employers have now sacked him, and everyone who he is involved with is currently being questioned by the FBI. The White House press secretary, Jay Carney, commented on the administration's response to Snowden's whistleblowing. We need to strike the appropriate balance between our national security interests and our interests in privacy. The fact that upon coming into office, that is President Obama, assessed, and his team assessed programs that existed, in some cases enhanced oversight, and he believes that with the oversight that exists and the implementation of the programs as they are implemented, that the balance is appropriately struck and has been appropriately struck. But it is an absolutely appropriate topic for debate. Meanwhile, they are preparing charges against Edward Snowden. But certainly this has gone down well with the general public in the US. Large sections of the public are in support of Snowden's whistleblowing. In New York City, over 43,000 people have signed a petition asking for a pardon by the President for Edward Snowden. So a support movement for Snowden is already taking off. And New York activist Andrew Stepanian was amongst dozens who was in Manhattan collecting signatures this week. He says, I think a lot of us are encouraging people today, wherever they are in the US, whatever city they're in, to start their own rallies, united behind the hashtag that says, I stand with Edward Snowden. And no matter how small or how large, encourage the people around you to celebrate Edward Snowden and what he did selflessly for us Americans, and to take the conversation out of the margins to prevent him from being demonized or maligned, whether it be in the media or by the government, and have a conversation about what he did and how that it was a public service. The petition on the White House website to pardon Snowden has now received over 43,000 signatures. Meanwhile, also in the US, an appeals court has finally dismissed a lawsuit taken by the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, initially against President Bush. So this just shows how long they drag these court cases out. The US Appeals Court has dismissed a lawsuit against President Obama and the head of the National Security Agency over warrantless domestic surveillance of telephone calls and emails. This suit was initially filed against the Bush government, but in a statement on Monday, the Center for Constitutional Rights noted, ironically, the dismissal of this case comes just as a series of new stories about an astonishingly broad domestic NSA surveillance has broken in the news. So the ACLU and other groups have also filed another case with the Top Secret Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, asking it to make public its opinions on the section of the Patriot Act that authorizes the government to obtain, quote, any tangible thing, unquote, related to a foreign intelligence or terrorism investigation. That section was that's the basis for the court order, which has been used to justify the wide sweeping surveillance of all Verizon customers, as exposed by Edward Snowden this last week. So moving over to Turkey, in Turkey there's been a standoff situation for the past 2 weeks now at Taksim Square, where protesters initially occupied a site against the intention to develop a park in that area, and that initial peaceful occupation was then attacked ruthlessly by the police, and there was then a wide sweeping demonstration in the streets with street fighting between protesters and the police and security services. The government then appeared to back down. The Deputy Prime Minister accepted that the police had been heavy-handed against the protesters, and as a result the police were moved away from Taksim Square, and an occupation existed for a period of over the last week or so, with generally, lots of a mixed kind of group of old and young families, etc. People camping there, teach-ins, a very communal, cooperative, positive thing like we've seen at Tahrir Square in Cairo previously, and in the Western Occupy events. And that, however, has been now brutally stopped as the Turkish police in riot gear descended on the protest camp, firing tear gas and rubber bullets again, and forcing people to flee. So once again the streets have been cleared. I don't know what that noise was. We'll continue. So over in Iraq, the violence there has killed another 70 this week. This is bringing a total of nearly 2,000 people who've actually been killed since April. And this is absolutely shocking. And certainly, there is very little attempt by any of the media to actually profile this and to understand what is happening here and where Iraq is going. And that is something I'm going to come back to in the later story on NATO and the policy of Balkanization. So, in Pakistan this week, a NATO convoy was attacked by the Taliban. This is a regular occurrence where convoys are attacked going through the tribal regions over the mountains. They're vulnerable to attack, and there was this attack to the NATO supply convoy, and 6 people were killed. The vehicles were carrying military equipment, and that occurred in Pakistan's Khyber tribal region. This is just another, facet of the kind of unsustainability of the occupation in Afghanistan, the immense logistical system that is in place, the cost of moving all this equipment and fuel overland, either through Pakistan or from Kazakhstan. Back in the US, the Pentagon is seeking to increase their budget for cybersecurity. There have been reports this week that the Pentagon is seeking to spend nearly 23 billion on cybersecurity over the next 5 years, including 4.65 billion in the coming financial year. That will be an increase of 18% over the current spending on cyber security. The budget outline includes more than 9 billion for defence against cyber attacks, and nearly the same amount for mounting cyber operations. So that is clearly an indication of the extent to which the United States is engaged in cyber wars. And I recall that last week when Obama met with the Chinese deputy premier who was visiting the US, the claims and complaints by the US against Chinese cyber attacks on US corporations was one of the topics that they were discussing. So, I mean, clearly this is the kettle calling the pot black, isn't it? So it would be interesting to know more about what these cyber attacks entail. Breaking news, Obama has said once again that he's considering arming the Syrian rebels this week. This is currently 3 countries who are saying that they are going to arm the Syrian rebels. We've got the US, France, and now the UK. In the US also, in the Supreme Court, a case against Donald Rumsfeld, former Defense Secretary under President Bush, for involvement in torture, has been dismissed. The case was taken by 2 contractors, 2 US contractors who were employed by the Iraqi-owned firm Shield Group Security, and they were actually cooperating with the FBI in investigating their employers' involvement in gun running into Iraq. At that point, that was in 2006. They were then taken into they were captured and imprisoned by their employers, and they were subject to mistreatment and torture, and have taken the court case against Rumsfeld because he was responsible for their mistreatment, because he personally approved torture techniques used by the US forces in Iraq. But the Monday decision by the Supreme Court states Rumsfeld was not liable. In Pakistan, there was another US drone strike that killed 9 people. And that is the first drone strike under the current Pakistani President Nawaz Sharif, who has committed himself to stopping the drone attacks. So this is clearly, a tete-a-tete situation there, with the US pushing, the drone war in Pakistan, and as a result, the Pakistani government has lodged a formal complaint with the US government, and a spokesperson, Aziz Ahmed Chowdhury, for the Pakistani government, told the US envoy Richard Hoagland that, quote, given the fact that this drone strike has taken place after the installation of the new government, the importance of this particular protest can be gauged from the fact that the Prime Minister himself gave the instruction, and this was delivered at a very high level. And we do hope that the US government would see the merit in the protest that the government of Pakistan has lodged, and the arguments that we are making that this is counterproductive and violates our sovereignty. Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif said this daily business of drones has to stop immediately. other countries must respect our sovereignty and address our concerns as we respect their sovereignty. So tough words there from Pakistani Premier Nawaz Sharif to the US over the ongoing drone strikes on Pakistani territory. In Afghanistan this week, there has been a Taliban attack on Kabul airport. 7 Taliban militants assaulted the main international airport in Kabul. 2 of them were suicide bombers, while the rest were gunmen. They were all shot dead by Afghan security forces. Meanwhile, also in Afghanistan, 3 Americans were killed in an attack by Afghan soldiers. What's called the blue on green attacks. The attack came one day after an Afghan soldier had shot several of his, 2 Afghan soldiers actually, shot several of their colleagues and disappeared with the vehicles and military equipment there. In Syria, the fighting has continued to escalate this week as after taking the city of Qusayr from the rebels, the Syrian government forces are now assaulting Aleppo, and the fighting between the Syrian rebels and the government forces has spread to the Golan Heights. That is the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, which are currently monitored by UN peacekeepers. As a result, the Austrian government withdrew their peacekeepers temporarily. Over 400 Austrian troops currently stationed on the Golan Heights after the Syrian rebels captured their position. So I think this is the second time that something like this has happened, and is a sign of the escalating war there. There has been a judgment this week, or rather an agreement by the UK government to pay out compensation to Kenyan civilians who were tortured and disabled mistreated during the Mau Mau uprising. That was between 1952 and 1960, when the Kenyans were fighting for their independence. The British colonial troops notoriously put people into what we would know as concentration camps and tortured them there. So William Hague, the British Foreign Minister, stated, "The British government recognises that Kenyans were subject to torture and other forms of ill treatment at the hands of the colonial administration. The British government sincerely regrets these abuses took place and that they marred Kenya's progress towards independence. Torture and ill treatment are abhorrent violations of human dignity, which we unreservedly condemn." The head of the Mau Mau Veterans Association said the compensation of 22 million, which will go to a group of more than 5,000 veterans of Kenya's Mau Mau resistance movement is really insufficient, and that on average the survivors will receive just under £5,000 each, and for many of them they are suffering from life changing disabilities. People had limbs amputated, they were castrated, and this was by our heroes, the British Armed Forces. The head of the Mau Mau War Veterans Association said that the compensation was too low, stating, "Enough, it can't be enough. We were detained for 10 years. I was detained for 7 years with my father, who raised me. So the issue of 300,000 Kenyan shillings is far from the amount that I should have been paid, or my father, or anyone else who was there during the fight." And the last piece of news, there's been a lot of focus this year on the Nakba. This was the Holocaust for the Palestinians in 1948, when the Jewish terror gangs attacked them across the territory of Palestine. This was a prelude to the establishment of the Israeli state, and was a planned operation which had been aided and abetted and facilitated by the British government, who'd undertaken investigation, a correlation of the Palestinian population, where they were, how many people lived in each village, etc. And this information was used by the Jewish terror gangs to murder thousands and possibly hundreds of thousands of Palestinians across the territory that it is now controlled by Israel. The result was to force those who survived to flee their homes and to flee them into the neighbouring Arab countries, into Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, etc., thus facilitating and allowing the Jewish settlers to occupy the Palestinian land, and to establish the de facto Jewish control of land in the territory that was Palestine, but subsequently became the racist Zionist Israeli state. So most of the allegations of the Nakba have been denied by the Jewish establishment. There has, for the past few weeks, been a very good documentary series on the Al Jazeera TV network called the Nakba. I would advise anybody to, look out for that. There are recordings of this available on the internet. It's a 4-part series, the Nakba, on Al Jazeera TV. But just this week, some workers in the Jaffa area of Tel Aviv, who were carrying out renovations at a Muslim cemetery, unearthed 6 separate chambers which were full of skeletons. Now, this was clear evidence of the murder of these Palestinians. There were several hundred skeletons in these chambers of all ages and presumably genders. The Israeli government has denied any connection to the Jewish terror gangs or to the Israeli security services, Zionists, etc. They have actually claimed that the Palestinians were murdered by fellow Palestinians or fellow Arabs, anyone other than Jews. So that's all of the news for the moment. This week's topic, looking initially at the NATO's worldwide expansion in the post-Cold War era. And last week I did mention reports about the on-off Colombian statements by President Santos, the Colombian president, who stated that they were making arrangements, Colombia was making arrangements to join NATO. This did subsequently change. It was denied by NATO, but the US has stated that what they want is Colombia to be a working partner with NATO, particularly in the area of intelligence and logistics. So essentially, they would be a forward base for NATO, and they already have the bases there. The US has bases in Colombia. This is something that other Latin Americans fear. They don't want to see NATO extending its tentacles onto the Latin American continent, and they do take this as a threat. This week, the focus on NATO extension moved to Georgia as the Russian armed forces moved to reinforce the border around the breakaway republic of South Ossetia. Now, this was a contested border in the war that would be 2011, I think, with between Georgia and Russia. And at that time, a NATO membership of Georgian NATO membership was being sought by the US. So just this week, Russia, in their statements defending their reinforcement of the border, stated that they were fearing that they were being encircled by NATO, and so the proposed membership of Georgia once again came into the light there. So looking at NATO's expansion, we've seen what was alleged to be a defensive alliance created after the Second World War, principally against another military bloc, the Warsaw Pact. We've seen that transform into a kind of global police force, an ever-expanding military alliance that is not content with defending its own areas, the Western Hemisphere, but is gradually extending into all continents. We now have NATO operations in Afghanistan in Southeast Asia. We've had NATO operations in Africa, in Libya. We've previously seen NATO operations in the Middle East and in Eastern Europe, in former Yugoslavia. So clearly, this is the new world order. This extension of NATO is imposing a military hegemony on the rest of the world. And what I'd like to look at really is what kind of a world they're trying to create, and some of the ways in which they're trying to reorganize and remodel the world. So we're looking at the situation in Syria at the moment. I see that what is happening in Syria is a sign of things to come for the rest of the Middle Eastern region. And to some extent, this is modelled also on what happened in North Africa previously last year in Libya. So it's clear that regime change is not the only goal. They are not just after changing the government of these states that they're intervening in, that they're interfering with. They are also dividing some of these, what were previous sovereign states. They're dividing them into statelets. It's could be described as really a balkanization. You may remember that the Balkans were known for being a conglomerate of different small political entities that were controlled by the main powers that would be in the 19th century. And we then had kind of revolts from 1848 onwards, where these small statelets were forged into the nation states. So we now have a reverse process of that, where sovereign nation states are being broken down once again into smaller statelets, often based on ethnic differences. So, for example, in Syria, what we're seeing is the balkanization of the Syrian state, with the Kurds organizing themselves in the north of the country, with the Druze in the southern hills, the Alawites in the coastal western mountain regions, and with the Sunni majority in the rest of Syria. So again, this kind of reinforces what is happening also in Iraq post NATO US occupation in Iraq. Although there is ostensibly on paper a sovereign state of Iraq, and a national government which is Shiite controlled, we are seeing, firstly, we've got a de facto state in the north of Iraq, a Kurdish de facto state which has been recognized by, informally by many NATO states. Indeed, the separate oil treaties have been negotiated with the regional government in Kirkuk, in Kurdistan, in the north of Iraq. Now, with the increased violence that I reported earlier, we are seeing a breaking down of areas, ethnic cleansing between the Shiites and Sunnis, and I would predict that the kind of end goal of this is that there will be separate Shiite and Sunni areas. Now, this just happens to agree with a 2006 plan for the Middle East. It kind of models a map which was prepared by a Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peet in June 2006 of how, you know, the Middle East would be reorganized. So you can see how Iraq is being broken down into smaller political units. We've got the Kurdish state in the north. We're going to have the Shiite state in the south, and in the middle we will have maybe a Sunni separate state. And similarly in Libya, the way that the country was organized after the NATO intervention, the NATO war there, was so that there is like a federal government. It is being divided into two separate entities, Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. So those are, historically, they were separate regions with separate ethnic differences, and that is the way that Libya is going. So in all these countries, wherever this balkanization is taking place, the main factor is that regardless of the change of boundaries, the oil or gas keeps flowing, and it keeps flowing out of these broken states and into the hands of the Western powers. Just on that one, I just mention Sudan. Again, we've seen following the Darfur crisis, which to some extent I would say this was a fabricated crisis, a created situation that forced Sudan into backing off and allowing the south of Sudan to become a separate state. So that is what's happened there. Unfortunately, the complication that has just arisen this week there is that the oil coming out of and gas coming out of South Sudan is still coming through pipelines which go through the Sudanese Republic and the Sudanese Arab Republic, and those pipes have just been closed in a tense situation between the South Sudanese government and North Sudan. So what I'm trying to say is that this is happening all over the globe, really. And I think Syria allows us to see, if we look at Syria, it allows us to see this as it is developing. So what we're seeing is a division into different ethnic groups. The events we're seeing ethnic and often what appear to be religious conflicts, whether it's Christian against Muslim, Arab against Berber, Arab against Iranian, Arab against Turks, Kurds against Turks, or Kurds against Arabs. We're seeing an increase in hatred and fear. The use of, I'll call it terror, creates fear in people to the extent that they fear all foreigners, all people of different religions, different ethnic groups, and they will only feel safe with people of their own kind. And this is a part of the program itself. The reason for the use of terror to create fear so that people can be manipulated, and the bottom line is the corporations can get access to the remaining world resources without any kind of opposition, at lowest price and with least trouble. So for example, looking at Kurdish nationalism, we've seen we've got conflicts between Kurdish nationalists who seem to spread around Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey, and they are looking to create a Kurdish state, a large Kurdish state there. And again, this was mirrored in Colonel Pete's map. We can see there is a large Kurdistan. There is which encompasses territory that's currently in Turkey, as well as Iran, that would be Syria and Iraq. Now, the Turkish government is to some extent here stoking the fire and then playing with the fire, because they've actually been engaged in a 40-year civil war with the PKK, Kurdish resistance in Turkey, and meanwhile that conflict is continuing. We are seeing bombings in Turkey, and whilst those have been blamed on Syria, be very sure that these are Kurdish operations. There is an open rebellion in the south of Turkey by Kurdish forces. Okay, so what I'm really trying to do is just give you a flavour of what is happening. This balkanization, this breakdown of nation states, recreation, particularly of the Middle East and North Africa. And within that, we're going to see the expansion of Israel. So be very sure also that Israel will take more territory. They are actually stoking the war in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and also they're involved in the Syrian conflict. They've been involved, attacked Syria several times. Their troops are on Syrian territory, and they will look to start creating the Greater Israel. Sorry, I just dried up. Excuse me a minute, please. So that's a picture of where the world is going. The New World Order is remodeling the North Africa and the Middle East, even in South Asia, and NATO trying to also move into Latin America, Africa. Okay, so thanks for listening. This is the Paxmundi show on Darkcity Radio. And, please call in or chat next week. I'll be here again on Thursday at 7 p.m. GMT on Darkcity Radio.